In December it will be 40 years since the murder of the Beatles founder, and before then a parole board will consider for the 11th time whether his killer should walk free. James McMahon looks back at the events of that fateful day in 1980, and at the man who ended the life of a legend. 2 summers ago, in August, Mark David Chapman took off his prison uniform, put on his smartest clothes and, under the watchful eyes of the Wende Correctional Facility guards, made his way to the New York Parole Board building complex. This was the 10th time prisoner 8182-860 had made such a journey, all of which had taken place within the past 20 years, having made his first appeal 2 decades after his initial conviction for the murder of John Lennon. 10 journeys there. 10 journeys back. And 10 rejections, despite this time Chapman seeming more contrite than he'd ever been in his many appearances in the now familiar setting. 30 years ago, I couldn't say I felt shame, and I know what shame is now, he told the parole board. It's where you cover your face, you don't want to, ask for anything. The man who violently ended the life of Lennon, and any hope that the Beatles may reunite 11 years after their messy split in 1969, is now 64. He is losing his hair and resembles little the doughy, socially inept young man who announced himself to the world 40 years ago. 5 shots. 4 bullet holes in the back of Lennon, who was pronounced dead on arrival at Roosevelt Hospital, New York, a little after 11 p.m. on the evening of the 8th of December 1980. Chapman was arrested meters from where the murder took place, outside the Manhattan, Dakota apartment that Lennon and wife Yoko Ono shared with their 5-year-old son Sean. There was the killer, leaning silently against the wall of the Dakota, reading the J.D. Salinger novel The Catcher in the Rye. The book, he would tell police upon their arrival, doubled as his manifesto. I acted alone, he said as handcuffs were applied. Lennon was 40 at the time of his death. He had only just returned from a self-imposed 5-year musical absence in which he had baked bread, and looked after the baby. Then that October he released his first new music in years, with the release of the single, Just Like Starting Over. His album with Ono, Double Fantasy, followed the next month, featuring songs he had written or finessed during a sailing trip in the summer of 1980. The trip was to be ill-fated. Journeying from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda, Lennon's yacht entered a prolonged storm. With most of the crew suffering from seasickness, the musician was forced to take control of the wheel alone. What followed was much meditation on the fragility of life. I was so centered after the experience at sea, he said, that I was tuned into the cosmos, and all these songs came. Lennon and Chapman shared little in common, but both were searching for something. Just a few years prior, Chapman had made his own journey. He traveled to Tokyo, to Seoul, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, Delhi and Beirut, then London, Paris and Dublin. Through his adventuring, Chapman met his wife, a Japanese-American woman several years his senior called Gloria Abe. She'd been his travel agent. They married on the 2nd of June 1979, and remain wed to this day. They settled in Hawaii. He took a job as a night security guard and started drinking heavily. In September 1980 he wrote a letter to a friend. I'm going nuts, it read. It was signed, The Catcher in the Rye. Salinger's meditation on alienation has a dark legacy. The book was found in John Hinckley Jr.'s hotel room after his attempt on President Ronald Reagan's life in 1981. Robert John Bardo was carrying the book when he murdered the model and actor Rebecca Sheffer in 1989. It's long been believed that Chapman's plan to kill his idol was formulated in the midst of his heavy drinking. In recent years Chapman has claimed that his hit list extended beyond Lennon. In 2010, he claimed he'd chosen Lennon out of convenience. It could have been Paul McCartney, Elizabeth Taylor, talk show host Johnny Carson, former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, actor George C. Scott, famous for turning down the Best Actor award at the 1970 Oscars, even the aforementioned Ronald Reagan. Hawaii Governor George Ariyoshi rounded out the list. It's been said the musician Todd Rundgren was a target. Chapman was wearing a promotional T-shirt for Rundgren's album Hermit of Mink Hollow when he was arrested. David Bowie once claimed he was second on the list. The question as to why Chapman killed John Lennon has never truly been answered. He's given conflicting versions of his rationale for decades, citing his spiritual beliefs, his own desire to become famous, even that killing Lennon would help promote his beloved Catcher in the Rye, almost as if he's still trying to make sense of the event himself. He had no criminal convictions prior to the murder. He loved the Beatles almost all his life. Lennon was his hero. As a teenager, the British band's vivid, colorful pop provided him with a place to escape to when the fists of his violent U.S. Air Force sergeant father rained down upon him. By 14, he was experimenting with LSD and missing classes at Columbia High School, Decatur, Georgia. The Beatles then were into long hair, beards, meditation, and drugs, he said. The Beatles were into things that fit my life perfectly. Unquestionably, the teenage Chapman was also already showing signs of mental instability. Most nights he would lay in his bedroom, imagining he was the king of a tiny race of people who lived in the walls. Generally, the appeal of his sovereignty over the little people was their adoration. I was their hero and was in the paper every day and I was on TV every day. But, he would later tell the journalist Jack Jones, sometimes when I'd get mad I'd blow some of them up. I'd have this push-button thing, part of the sofa, and I'd get mad and blow out part of the wall and a lot of them would die. But the people would still forgive me for that, and, everything got back to normal. That's a fantasy one had for many years. Prior to killing Lennon, Chapman would say that the little people in the walls had come back. And around this time he also discovered religion, attending a retreat held by the Chapel Woods Presbyterian Church when he was aged 15. He found the experience deeply affecting. He stopped taking drugs, put away his hippie clothes, started wearing a suit and carrying a Bible at all times. He even began to leave religious tracts in the school lockers. At some point I lifted my hands and I said, "Jesus, come to me. Help me," he recalled. And that was my time of true spiritual rebirth. That night I came to a door. When I opened the door and let God come physically into my heart, I felt cleansed. I felt totally forgiven and totally renewed. Crucially, he also began to sour on Beatle John.